His life's work was selling hope by the pound. He had no idea he'd just sold his own son a bag of poison. A man's ledger is a record of his sins, not his triumphs. Elon knew this, but he never truly believed it until the poison did its work. The air in his store hung heavy with the scent of dust and leather, a familiar comfort that now felt like a shroud. Outside, the sun beat down on the hard-packed earth of Harmony Gulch, baking the wooden storefronts and casting long, sharp shadows. Elon stood behind his counter, the polished wood worn smooth by years of transactions, of hands exchanging money for hope. Hope in the form of flour, salt, coffee beans, the simple necessities that kept a man going in this unforgiving land. He was a man built of quiet stone, his face weathered not by years but by hard decisions. His hair was a salt and pepper gray, thinning at the temples, and his eyes held a permanent sorrow that he had long ago learned to conceal. He had come to Harmony Gulch with nothing but a wife, a son, and a dream of a respectable life. Now he had a store, a reputation, and a deep, festering regret that no amount of clean living could wash away. The regret had a name, Silas Thorne, a gaunt, hollow-eyed man who had ridden into town 2 weeks ago on a tired horse, a desperate look in his eyes. He had offered Elon a deal, a shipment of supplies, cheap, a surplus from a failed mining venture up north, flour, sugar, tins of meat, coffee. Elon, ever the cautious merchant, had eyed the man with suspicion, but Silas had been persuasive, a silver tongue wrapped around a lie. He had talked of his own family, of the hardship that had forced him to liquidate his stock. He had spoken of the quality of the goods, a guarantee that was nothing but air.
Elon had been tempted by the price. He was barely breaking even, the town's small population and sparse traffic making it difficult to turn a real profit. He had bought the supplies, a wagon load of them, and had stored them in the back, away from the day-to-day stock. It was a moral compromise, a small shadow cast on his honest ledger. He told himself he would sell them cheap, a small benefit to the poor miners and prospectors who passed through town. He told himself it was just business. He began selling the supplies slowly, mixing them with his good stock, a little bit here, a little bit there. He watched as men and women carried the bags of flour and sugar from his store, their faces etched with the same wariness he felt. He had looked into their eyes and seen his own reflection, a man just trying to survive. But the feeling of complicity, of a hidden wrong, was a constant, dull thrum beneath the surface of his life. The first whispers began a few days ago. A family on the edge of town, the McCalls, had taken ill, a fever, a sickness that came on fast and hard. Elon had heard the news in hushed tones, the concern in the voices of his neighbors. He had felt a cold knot in his stomach, a premonition that he'd immediately tried to dismiss. But the knot tightened when old Mrs. Gable, a woman who lived off the few supplies she could afford, came in to complain about a bitter taste in her flour. Elon had apologized, had given her a new bag from his usual stock, but the seed of dread had been planted. He had gone to the back of the store, had opened a bag of the cheap flour. He had sniffed it, a faint metallic odor clinging to the air. He had tasted it, a subtle, sickening burn on his tongue. Now, 2 weeks after the shipment arrived, the sickness was a wildfire. It wasn't a fever, it was a poison. The doctor, a weary man named Harrison, had ridden in from a neighboring town, his face grim. He had identified the culprit, a low-grade arsenic, likely mixed in with the cheap supplies to keep pests away. A common practice among unscrupulous merchants, a poison that was slow, insidious, and deadly. Elon's stomach lurched. He had sold the supplies. He had traded a lie for a few dollars.
He closed the store early. He locked the heavy wooden door and stared at the sign that bore his name, Elon's General Store. The words seemed to mock him, a general store for general lies. He walked the dusty street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dirt. He passed the McCall's small shack, the curtains drawn tight, a silence hanging in the air that spoke of finality. He saw Mrs. Gable's son, a boy no older than 10, sitting on the porch swing, his small shoulders shaking with a grief he could not yet comprehend. He felt the weight of every bag of flour, every tin of meat, every pound of coffee he had sold from that ill-fated shipment. He had poisoned his own town. He had poisoned his neighbors, his friends. He had poisoned a boy no older than his own son, Silas. Elan's son was not with him. He had left a year ago, seeking his own fortune in the goldfields of the Sierra Nevada. He had been a restless boy, full of a fierce, untamed energy that the small town could not contain. Elan had watched him go with a heavy heart, a father's fear warring with a father's pride. He had given him his blessing, a warm coat, a good horse, and a sack of supplies for the journey, a sack he had filled himself with the best goods from his store. Or so he had thought.
A letter had arrived 2 weeks ago. It was from Silas, a short, hopeful missive. He had found a small claim, a riverbed that showed promise. He was working hard, saving his money. He was coming home in a few months with a small fortune. He had even bought new supplies from a passing merchant, a man with a wagon full of goods. He had written, "A good deal, father, a real bargain. Saved me a pretty penny." Alon's blood ran cold. The letter was on the counter in his store, its words a brand on his conscience. A good deal, a real bargain. He saw the face of Silas Thorne, the hollow eyes, the desperate plea. He saw his own face, a face of greed, of a small moral compromise. The words of the letter, once a source of pride, were now a death sentence. He walked to the telegraph office, the familiar path now a road of thorns. He found the operator, a young man named Finn, his face pale and drawn. Finn had been one of Elan's customers. Elan had sold him a bag of the tainted flour. He met Finn's eyes, a silent apology passing between them. Finn simply nodded, his own quiet grief a mirror of Elan's. Elan wrote the telegram slowly, each word a stone in his heart. It was a warning, a desperate plea. Cyrus, dangerous supplies. Do not eat, do not use. Head home. Father. He handed the slip to Finn, his hand trembling. Finn read the words, his eyes widening in understanding. He took the telegram, his movements slow and deliberate, and began to tap out the message, the sound a frantic, desperate rhythm in the silent room. Elan paid him, a fistful of coins that felt like blood money, and walked out into the fading light of day.
The second section of his life began with a whisper and a tap. The telegraph office seemed to hum with a secret, a knowledge that only he and Finn shared. Elan went home, his house a silent tomb. He sat at the kitchen table, the empty chair where Silas used to sit a gaping wound. He had poisoned his son. He had sent him into the world with a bag of tainted supplies. A loving gesture turned into a deadly mistake. The thought was a relentless hammer blow, shattering the calm facade he had built around himself. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He sat in the dark, watching the moon rise over the hills, its pale light a cold comfort. He thought of Silas, a boy of 18, with a crooked smile and a fierce, unyielding spirit. He had taught him to fish, to hunt, to mend a fence. He had taught him the value of an honest day's work. And he had sent him to his death with a lie. The days passed in a blur of silent suffering. The town was a ghost town, the sickness a plague that had stolen the life from its streets. The doctor was overworked, his face a mask of exhaustion. Elan saw him riding out to the McCall's shack, a small shovel tied to the back of his horse. The scene was a dagger in Elan's heart. He had killed them. He had killed his neighbors. He had killed his son. The letter, once a hopeful promise, was now a torment. He read it over and over, each word a fresh wound. A good deal, father, a real bargain. He saw his son, his face smiling, his eyes bright with a future that was now a past. He saw him buying the supplies, a simple transaction, a father and son separated by a few miles of dirt and a few days of time. He saw the grim face of Silas Thorne, the gaunt, hollow-eyed man, the source of his son's destruction.
Alon's grief was not a loud, wailing thing. It was a silent, corrosive acid that ate away at his soul. He had no one to share his burden with. His wife had died a few years ago. a quiet, lingering illness that had left a permanent shadow in his home. His son was gone, a ghost in the mountains. He was alone with his guilt, a solitary island in a sea of his own making. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to Silas Thorne. The man had to be held accountable. Elon had to look into the eyes of the man who had sold him the poison, the man who had set this tragedy in motion. He had to see his face, to feel the weight of his own betrayal. He packed a small bag, a change of clothes, a few tins of food. He took his old rifle from the wall, a trusted companion that had seen him through a few scrapes. He had no intention of using it. He just wanted it to be there, a silent promise of a reckoning. He wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table. Gone to find Silas Thorne. I will be back. He signed his name, Elon, a name that felt like a stranger's. He left Harmony Gulch at dawn, the sun a crimson slash on the horizon. He rode his horse, a sturdy bay named Jasper, out of town, leaving the silent streets behind. The road was a long, dusty ribbon stretching into the unknown. He rode for 3 days, stopping only to rest and water his horse. He thought of his son, of the hopeful look in his eyes as he rode away, a father's blessing, a silent curse.
On the 3rd day, he found the man. Silas Thorne was holed up in a dilapidated shack on the outskirts of a small mining town called Redemption Creek. The town was a misnomer. There was no redemption here, just a collection of tired men digging for a dream that was long dead. Elon dismounted his horse and walked to the shack, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He saw Silas sitting on a rickety porch, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, his eyes a vacant stare. He was a shadow of the man who had come to Harmony Gulch. He was broken, a man drowning in his own lies. Elon stood before him, the sun casting his shadow over the man. Silas looked up, his eyes meeting Elon's. He saw the recognition in his eyes, the dawning horror. "Elon," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here?" Elon didn't answer. He simply stood there, his face a mask of stone. He looked at Silas, the man who had brought this ruin upon him, and saw not a monster, but a man who had made a bad decision, a man who had sold his soul for a few dollars. "The supplies," Elon said, his voice a low growl. "The poison." Silas's face crumpled. He looked away, his eyes darting to the bottle in his hand. I didn't know," he said. "I swear, they told me it was just a little to keep the pests away. A few tins, that's all. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." Elon felt a strange sense of emptiness. He had come here for a reckoning, for a moment of vengeance, and he had found only a broken man. He had expected to see a monster, but he saw only a reflection of himself, a man who had made a terrible mistake. "My son bought them," Elon said, his voice a whisper. "He bought your poison." Silas's eyes widened, a look of pure, unadulterated horror on his face. He looked at Elon, his face a mixture of guilt and despair. He saw the pain in Elon's eyes, the quiet devastation. He saw the ghost of a boy who had been sent to his death by a father's mistake and a merchant's lie. I'm sorry," Silas said, his voice a broken sob. "I'm so sorry." Elon didn't say anything. He just looked at the man, at the ruin he had wrought. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel rage. He felt only a vast, unending sorrow. He turned and walked away, his heart a desolate wasteland. He got on his horse and rode away from Redemption Creek, leaving the ghost of a man behind. The final section of his life began with a return. He rode back to Harmony Gulch, the same sun, the same dust, the same weary land. But something had changed. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but it was no longer a silent, corrosive thing. It was a quiet ache, a part of who he was. He went back to his store, the sign a reminder of his shame. He opened the doors and began to clean. He threw out the remaining tainted supplies, the bags of flour and sugar, the tins of meat. He took them to the edge of town and buried them, a silent funeral for a terrible mistake. He swept the floor, he polished the counter, he restocked the shelves with new supplies, good supplies, supplies he had paid an honest price for. He went to see the doctor, Harrison. He found him at the McCall's shack, standing over a fresh grave. Elon walked up to him, his head bowed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I sold them the supplies."
Harrison looked at him, his face a mixture of exhaustion and understanding. "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "We all knew." Elon felt a strange sense of relief. The secret was out. The burden was shared. He had faced his sin, and the world had not ended. "I'm going to make it right," Elon said. "I'll pay for their burials. I'll make sure their families are taken care of. I'll do what I can." Harrison nodded. "That's all any of us can do, Elon. All any of us can do." Elon went to the families who had suffered, the ones who had lost loved ones, the ones who had been sickened. He offered them money, he offered them supplies, he offered them his help. Some accepted, their faces etched with a quiet grief. Some refused, their eyes holding a bitter resentment he knew he deserved. He did not argue. He simply left the money on their doorsteps, a silent apology. He spent his days in the store, a silent sentry against his own past. He sold his goods, he talked to his customers, and he watched the seasons change. The town slowly began to heal. The sickness faded, the graves became silent monuments to a terrible mistake. The sun still beat down on the hard-packed earth, but the air felt a little less heavy. One day, a letter arrived. It was from the doctor in Redemption Creek, a man named Sterling. He wrote that Silas Thorne had left town. He had left a note for Elon. The note was simple, a few words scrawled on a piece of paper. "I saw him, Elon, your son. He came through here a week ago. He was on his way home." Elon's heart stopped. He read the words again, his eyes devouring them, a desperate hope blooming in his chest. He was on his way home. The telegraph had gotten to him. The warning had been heeded. He ran to the edge of town, to the road that stretched out to the mountains. He stood there, watching, waiting. The sun was setting, painting the sky in a blaze of orange and red. The dust on the road shimmered in the fading light. He saw him, a figure on a horse, a lone rider on the long, dusty road. It was Silas. He was alive. Elon stood there, a silent statue, as the figure drew closer. He saw his son's face, a little older, a little more weathered, but with the same fierce, untamed spirit in his eyes. He saw the horse, a tired, dusty creature. He saw the bags tied to the saddle, supplies for the long journey home. Silas dismounted his horse and walked toward him, a confused look on his face. He saw the look in his father's eyes, the quiet devastation, the unspeakable relief. "Father?" he said, his voice a hesitant question. "What's wrong?" Elon didn't say anything. He just looked at his son, at the life he had almost taken. He reached out and pulled him into a hug, a desperate, suffocating embrace. He held him tight, to feel his son's body, a tangible, undeniable truth. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I had poisoned you." Silas pulled back, his face a mask of confusion. "The telegram," he said. "I got it. You were worried about nothing. The supplies I bought, they were from a good merchant. I threw away the ones you gave me, though. They tasted a little off." Elon stared at him, the words sinking in. The supplies he had given his son, the ones he had filled with his own hands, had been the good ones. The supplies Silas had bought on his journey home, the ones he had written about, were the ones that had been poisoned. The words of the letter, a source of torment, had been a lie that had saved his son's life. Silas looked at his father, his eyes searching for answers.
He saw the grief, the guilt, the unspeakable relief. He saw a man who had faced his own darkness and had been given a second chance. "I'm sorry, Silas," Elon said, his voice a broken whisper. "I'm so sorry." Silas didn't say anything. He just looked at his father, a quiet understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew what had happened. He knew the story of the poison, the sickness, the town's silent suffering. He knew the burden his father had carried, the cross he had borne. He reached out and put a hand on his father's shoulder, a silent gesture of forgiveness. He looked at his father, a man who had made a terrible mistake, and saw a man who had found his redemption. Elon looked at his son, at the face of a man who had almost been a ghost, and saw a new beginning. He had not killed his son, he had saved him. The ledger of his sins was still there, but a new entry had been made. An entry of a father's love, a son's forgiveness, and a quiet, hard-earned peace.
The sun had set. The air was cool now, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves on the trees. Father and son stood together on the long, dusty road, two figures silhouetted against the fading light. They had a lifetime of silent conversations to have, a lifetime of unspoken losses to heal. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.